so that everyone will also be able to see it later on. So why don't we start first with a prayer, and then I'll kind of talk you through what we're going to do.
Sure.
You want to go ahead?
Yep, I have a prayer. Okay. This is a prayer called Hope by Victoria Safford. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, not the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, nor the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill and angry hinges, nor the cheerful, flimsy garden gate of everything is going to be all right, but a different, sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling about your own soul first of all and its condition, a place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world both as it is and as it should be, as it will be, the place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but the joy of the struggle. And where we stand there, all of us, beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeing, asking people what they see. Good and gracious God, as we gather this afternoon, we ask you to open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to the words and experiences that we will share. We ask that our sharing of this may continue to renew our faith and our desire, our will to do the work of justice and peace. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, John, for the prayer. What we like to do today is to give you all a little background on what is the School of the Americas, what happened when we went to Arizona, and what are some next steps that we can each take, and then we'll leave some time for question and answer at the end. So right now you're all muted, and also your videos are turned off, and at the end, when it comes time for question and answer, you can either join in with the chat button, where you see a chat button on your screen, or you can join in through unmuting yourself, or I can unmute you as well. So we're going to start with David here to tell us a little bit about the background.
Okay, so when we're talking about the School of the Americas, the School of the Americas is a combat training school for Latin American soldiers at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was renamed WINESEC later on in 2001, which is the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. And what it was originally founded in Panama and trained Latin American soldiers basically in counterinsurgency techniques, psychological warfare, military intelligence, and interrogation tactics. And the graduates from this school who are from South America, studying on American soil, have basically gone back to their own countries to wage war against their own people. The man who shot Oscar Romero was trained at the School of the Americas. And so it was really founded as a way to try and combat communism during the Cold War and things like that. But it's continued as the United States tries to have a presence and to control the destinies of countries in South America as a military power. And since it was started, I think what it really called attention to it was El Salvador, and how that the people would head back from the School of the Americas and basically start disappearing people. They would be trained in all these counterinsurgency techniques, all these really horrible things they did to people. having been trained by Americans, by us, to basically go in and make people's lives worse. And so the School of the Americas Watch was actually founded by Roy Bourgeois, who was a Maryknoll priest. I think you all know who Roy Bourgeois is or was. He was excommunicated a couple years ago because of his outspokenness on the concept of women's ordination. And Rome finally had the Maryknolls push him out. But he founded it, and the watch happens at Fort Benning, Georgia every year. And has drawn a lot of people. Trying to think what else here on this. So what are the different things that have happened here? Let me make a full screen here for myself. What am I doing? There we go. I can do that. I'm trying to see what all was going on here. It's basically hurt South America and Central America, in Uruguay, Bolivia, Costa Rica, all over the place. One of the things that so the SOA watch, and El Salvador, when people were fleeing because as the governments were destabilized, people were struggling, and so they would leave their countries to go on those dangerous journeys up through Central America, through Mexico, and come to the United States. So as the United States caused the destabilization of governments and the problems in these countries, people were coming to the United States, fleeing all these problems. Now, I was at the SOA Watch in 2011, which was the year of the Occupy movement. And so the school itself, the Watch, decided to take on a Occupy motif. But it's changed a lot. But in the early years, before 9/11, protesters would show up at Fort Benning, and it was very easy to enter the base. There was a line on the ground, and people who were protesting the school could cross that line and usually get arrested. A lot of people were there. You know who Louis Vitale is. He's a Franciscan from the California province, has always been involved, who makes a point of doing a civil action and getting himself arrested. Martin Sheen has always been a big part of it. But it was very easy to just walk across a line and get arrested and either go to jail for a few months, or if it was your first time, just being sit on a bus. So there have been a lot of people who have tried to make a point about the evils of the SOA, also called the School of Assassins by people who don't agree with it, to get themselves arrested to try and protest. It's a lot harder to get arrested these days because now, since the 9/11, there's a big wall around the compound. So to get in, you've got to put a fence, a gate, ladder up. You got to cross over. Not nearly as many people get arrested at it anymore, but it's a pretty common. It used to be a very common practice. And the way it works, like every protest, everybody shows up, right? Whenever there's a protest, everybody shows up, whether that be Roman Catholic women priests or the Buddhist coalition or all these different things who show up. And so everybody's there and they come together. There's a lot of theater that's involved in the protest. The puppetistas do lots of programs to call attention to different things. A lot of theatrical, there in the bottom left of your screen, you can see these black-clad figures with white faces, and they usually do a die-in at the property. So they all lay down with fake blood spattered on them, showing the dead bodies. And another big part of it is remembering the names of all who have been disappeared in South America. So the picture there at the top left, you can see people carrying these white crosses. And there's always a procession during the SOA Watch, the protest, where everybody carries a cross. There's a name of somebody who has been disappeared, and they call out every name, and everybody says presente, that person is present. So it's really about giving voice and name to the people who are had their lives and their voices and their names taken away from them. And it's a very moving experience to rehumanize people, to call attention to the humanity of the people who have been killed and disappeared and oppressed by the school. But there's lots of music, lots of theater, lots of speeches, but it's a very big thing. Eighth Day Center for Justice is a very big part of it, but everybody shows up. When I go to the next. So why does it matter to us? Me personally, I got interested in the SOA because one of my novice brothers, Manuel Aviles, who was born in El Salvador, his uncle was one of the disappeared people in El Salvador back in the late 70s. And so his uncle disappeared one day because he was doing too much to try and stop the government and was speaking out against it. But by calling attention to immigration, the church and we're destabilizing other people's governments, and it creates problems here in the United States from immigration issues coming through. It's problematic because in the United States, we want to say that all these horrible illegal immigrants coming across our borders and we don't want them, but we won't look at the fact that our methods and what we have done have caused the problem and are sending immigrants across the border, which is why we were down there. And I think many of us in all countries or all cities of the province have something to do with either immigration or with the Hispanic population. And so it's a big part of what happens. As you can see here in the pictures, these red dots there on the right are the deaths of people who have tried to cross the frontier just since October of last year. So that's a year's worth of red dots. Each of those red dots, or people have died crossing the border. And so we moved to the border this year to kind of show how the two issues were related between the destabilization of governments in Central and South America and how that forces people to cross the border looking for better lives. And it often results in death. And it's really horrible. There's a train, I think it's called El Patron, but everybody calls it La Bestia. And it's this train that comes from South America up through Central America into Mexico. And it was used to be one of the main ways people traveled from South America to Mexico to come to the United States. And it was awful. I mean, women would get raped. There are stories of people who didn't like that the baby was crying and took the woman's baby and threw it out the train under the train tracks. And so people who are so desperate to leave will even take this very dangerous mode of transportation for an uncertain future because it's better than what's going on in South America and in their countries. So I think Marcia is going to share more about why we went and what happened. So Marcia, do you want me to say anything else or do you want to take over?
I think you're great. And if there's anything that either of you want to add while I'm talking, feel free. So thank you, David. So now that you know why we went there, this is a little bit about what we did. So first we gathered with, sent out an email to a number of different religious orders across the U.S. to see who was going and how do we connect with each other, because as people who are either parts of religious congregations or affiliated, we think it's really important for us to be able to connect with each other and also learn from each other. And so this was a gathering we had on Friday. And there were mostly Sisters of Notre Dame and also Sisters of the Adrian Dominicans and some other folks who were there with us. And people told stories. And so this is the train that David was referring to. And in addition to what he said, another thing that really stuck out to me that somebody shared in the group was that women will take birth control pills ahead of going on the trip because they're expecting to be raped. And so people also told stories of different people that they knew who had crossed and what had happened to them. A number of people work at the border and talked about people who crossed over. And then somebody else also told stories about the children, because she was working with the children who were unaccompanied minors who crossed over on their own. Recently, there's been a lot more young people being sent up from Central America, and talking about how they are feeling guilty about eating because their family doesn't have food at home, and just really here to work. And so it was really nice to share stories with them and to learn from each other and really connect. And then that evening, we went to the Eloy Detention Center. It's the deadliest detention center. So these are places that immigrants are sent to who are caught by the immigration, by ICE. And once, this is one of the places people are sent to if they're there for more than 72 hours. And some of the folks there are there for over 2 years. And the cost of each person is $159 a day to keep people, not necessarily in Eloy, but just in general. And so that comes out to about $58,000 a year to keep people in these detention centers. And this detention center especially has been really horrendous, because there's been at least 5 people that they've said have committed suicide since 2003. And so the conditions there are pretty poor. And so we went there both to be with each other, to protest, to sing, to hold a vigil, but we also went there so that we could let people know that they weren't alone. And so at the end of the evening, we stood across from the Eloy Detention Center on the sidewalk, and they could hear us singing, they could see our lights. And John pointed out to me, and I was grateful that he did, that you could actually see the people standing in the windows watching and listening and flashing their lights back to say, thank you for being here and for paying attention to what's happening to us. And then the next day we crossed over the border. And one of the blogs, if you have a chance to read it, that it's posted, you can see it through our Facebook or go to thecapuchins.org/JPIC. I posted about crossing the border. And as we said, right, there's been at least 3,000 people that have died crossing the border since 2000, and that is just over in the Tucson area. And so that's the area between like Tucson to New Mexico, that 3,000 people have died in that crossing over. And so it's a really, really, really difficult period for people to cross over. And for us, it was a really actually pretty simple and easy experience. You can see in the picture in the middle where people just literally, we just walked across without having to have any sort of a passport or anything to get into Mexico. And then when we came back across, we just had to show our passport, and they didn't even ask us what we were doing. Well, they didn't ask me what I was doing. They just asked if I was bringing anything back. And so for that to be our experience crossing over the border, while in contrast, right, the people who died coming over, and you can see the candles of the pictures of the little girl. That's us over on the Mexico side, and then there's other people who joined in the protests on the other side of the border. And you can see Louis Vitalis, the other Franciscan, there with John and David, and then some of the folks who were part of the protest as we crossed over. Sure. And then we went to workshops and heard stories. So Las Patrones is a location in Mexico near the border to Central America. And the women there for the past 20 years, actually 21 years, have been just giving food to people every single day. They have from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. every day. They've just been handing out food to people who are coming across on the train called La Bestia, or the Beast. And without asking for money, without, doing anything that they weren't asking for anything. They just wanted to make sure people had food to cross over. And so we met some of the people who were a part of that journey. We also attended a workshop that there's actually at least, let me look at the number here. They know for certain that at least 239 veterans of the U.S. military have been deported to at least 34 different countries. And these are people who joined the military as legal citizens. So, well, they weren't citizens, they were legal in the country, so they had green cards, and they thought that they could, in the past, the way it's set up is that they were able to become citizens after serving the military, but it's no longer the case. You have to get information from your commander and have somebody set you up to become a citizen. So some folks have had, all the people who are deported had some sort of criminal record. Some of them as little as some minor offenses, and then others with bigger ones. But these are people who served in the military and got into trouble after they got out. So there are also people, from what I've read, that they've also been people who suffer from PTSD and a lot of other suffering, right, from being in the military. And so some people were released and sent straight back to wherever they came from when they were 3 years old. And these people are now banned for life from coming back to the U.S. However, they are allowed to be buried in U.S. military cemeteries. And John, you want to talk a little bit about climate change?
One of the things that, one of the workshops that I went to had to do with the effects of climate change on deportation, on migration throughout the Latin America. And one of the things that was very obvious was that because of the effects of climate change in many parts of the global South and in our own hemisphere in Latin America, there are a lot of people who are being displaced and dislocated from their homes because rivers are rising. In many places, large agricultural, particularly cattle producing operations have opened, and they're taking out acres and acres and acres of rainforest every day. And what it's creating is they're losing a carbon sink. And with the introduction of more cattle, they're raising the amount of methane and eventually the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, which of course is exacerbating warming and other forms of climate change. It's also linked to the corporatization, if you will, of agriculture. That agriculture is becoming a big business. And so a lot of farmers who had been doing small scale subsistence farming in different parts of Central America, Latin America, elsewhere in Latin America, are being pushed off their land essentially because they can't afford to raise their crops or even get them to any form of market to compete with the very cheap food that's and food products, agricultural products that are now being produced. It's also increasing the amount of monoculture in some areas, which is of course having a negative effect on growth patterns as well. So I think that's a big reason why people are coming north. The climate where they live is becoming less hospitable. The economic prospects that families have are degrading, and so they're looking north to see if there's a way that they can make a living and keep their families going. And it's also fueling a process of urbanization, greater urbanization within many countries. Mexico, of course, is a prime example of that, but it's happening all over. So again, this is one of the ways in which many of the problems that we're working on in JPIC are interrelated. The globalization of the economy, climate change, criminalization at the border, and all these issues are interwoven. And so we have to, as we attack them, individually, we also have to remember that they're related to other things that we also need to try to address in some form or fashion.
Thank you, John. And I think one of the questions that we were really looking at is how do we do that as people of faith and also with each other? And so this is a picture of us gathering again with some other religious congregations. I think there were 6 different groups. These are the young nuns that were traveling together. And so we gathered together with them at lunch and also shared stories with them. And then we also joined in. There was a march. There's a person named Jose Antonio. He was 16 when he was murdered in October of 2012. He was walking across the street from the border, and one of the border patrol people shot indiscriminately through the fence line. Somebody had been throwing rocks at him, and this young person was just walking by and got killed, and his family has been protesting and also saying that this person needs to be punished for what he did and he needs to be accountable. And they have the person's name is Lonnie Ray Swartz, and they were able to at least bring something into the court system, which is unprecedented because before they've never been able to prosecute any of the border patrol for what they've done. And but there hasn't been justice yet. Nothing has happened since that was brought up last year. And so they march every year, and they also do a mass and they pray. And so you can see the border right there, and that's the bishop. And so he came to say mass with the people, and we all came together to pray and also to remember him and all the other people who have died crossing the border. So what do we do about it? What are the next steps? How do we take what we've learned, but also thinking about your own experiences of immigration, and also as members of the province, what can we do to address these issues?
Yeah, and that's the part of the presentation that I'll be covering, and it can be summed up in 3 words: educate, advocate, and be about service. First, we can better educate ourselves about this very complex web of factors that influence migration patterns and the challenges and the opportunities that migration presents to our nation and really to the world. As we sit here today, 65 million refugees in the world, fleeing wars, fleeing degraded climates, particularly in Africa and the desert regions of Africa. Part of that education is listening to people's stories. One of the things that particularly struck me when I was in Nogales was listening to a presentation that a woman gave about the plight of workers in the Nogales area, and particularly in the maquiladora sector. She said that as a maquila worker, she had one of the better paying jobs. It paid 120 pesos a day, which is less than $7 an hour in American money. I mean, $7 a day in American money. And so when someone's getting paid that little, it's pretty easy to imagine why they would want to come to the United States, where they can maybe work for $6 or $7 under the table, $6 or $7 an hour under the table in a landscaping firm, or perhaps in a motel or something like that. And yet people have homes, in places like Nogales. And so they would like to have better working conditions where they are. And this woman who spoke to us was talking about how she and other workers at this maquila factory where she were petitioning the company to raise their wages to something that would be more of a living wage for them to help support their families. And she said that basically the company told them what I think we've heard others up north of the border say when they press their demands sometimes. And they basically said, well, if you don't like it, we'll move our factory to China. and things like that. So it's really, again, an issue of the globalization of the economy and the race to the bottom in terms of wages and working conditions very often. So that's one of the things that we learned. If you want to look at the interrelation of some of these issues with Central American and Mexican migration to the United States, we can really see a confluence of the economic policies I've mentioned, the legacy of militarism and the Cold War. In many of these countries, they have totalitarian regimes. There's been a lot of economic dislocation because of the war. The oligopolies that have been challenged by some of the rebel or depending on your point of view, freedom movements in Central America during the 70s and 80s. A lot of those oligopolies are still in place, and which means that people are in economically very difficult circumstances. You also look at the war on drugs and its impact on the stability of and security of many countries, particularly in Central America. You look at a country like El Salvador, which during the 70s and 80s and 90s saw a lot of its young men and young families moving often illegally or without documents to the United States, in cities like Los Angeles, where many of the young men fell into gang life, were locked up in prison, and as a consequence of our migration laws, were automatically deported immediately upon their release to prison. So they basically exported a lot of the gang lifestyle and a lot of gang conflicts to El Salvador, a country that was already destabilized, and it's destabilized it further, caused an increase in the amount of homicides and increased the amount of economic and just personal security in El Salvador. Another example of how these things all fit together is the privatization of military and correctional services. The Eloy Detention Center, which Marcia talked about earlier, the place where we had that vigil on Friday night, is operated by Corrections Corporation of America, which is among the two largest private providers of correctional services in the United States. The other is what's called the GEO Group. And these companies essentially sign contracts with the government, the federal government, to provide detention services and other related services to the federal government. When they first broke into this business, if you will, back in the 80s and 90s, it was during the war on drugs in this country when prison populations were increasing very rapidly. For example, in Wisconsin, between the middle 1980s and the year 2000, the state prison population went from about 7,000 to about 20,000. And Wisconsin, of course, like many states, didn't have the capacity to house all these prisoners, so they started sending them to privately run facilities in other states. As states found that the private companies were unable to deliver on their promises of better service at a lower price, and as they started to see the deleterious effects of the war on drugs, they started to reduce their prison populations and bring their prisoners back home. And so these companies started to look for other avenues where they could continue to grow their business. And it so happened that deportation and detention on the federal level was a growth opportunity, if you will, for them. And so they are operating a significant number the detention facilities here in the United States. So if you want to educate yourself further on this particular topic, a couple of great resources are the American Immigration Council and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. The Justice for Immigrants page on their website has a lot of really good resources, as well as some great policy and pastoral statements by the bishops. So I'd encourage you to do that. So educating is just part of it. We also need to advocate. And one of the ways in which we can do that is to utilize our UN treaties and other instruments. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights very clearly talks about things like freedom of migration, particularly within countries. Also, the rights, the basic rights that people have to due process when they're in things like deportation proceedings and other criminal or civil proceedings. The U.S. itself has ratified a number of treaties that directly impact the issue of immigration. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. We see in our own country the extraordinarily strong effect that our immigration policies have on Latino peoples. We can look to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which establishes many principles, again, for due process and detention and things like that. We can look at the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, which our government has ratified. Now, it's very important to remember that when the U.S. has ratified these treaties, which obviously once they're ratified according to our Constitution, they have the power of the law throughout our country, and they don't pertain just to citizens; they pertain to persons. We get in ratifying many of these covenants, our country as well as other countries who have ratified them have particular understandings or limitations that they can place on them in the implementation. So it's very important to know what those are as well. U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has enunciated a number of very important principles or elements of comprehensive immigration reform. And this goes to the advocacy that we need to have after this election cycle is over. Once our president has been elected and once Congress has been elected, we need to get back to the work of advocating for comprehensive immigration reform in our country. And the bishops have mentioned a number of important principles for us to pay attention to. First, that we need to look at anti-poverty efforts throughout the globe, throughout the world. In other words, if we can address the issues of poverty in Central America and in other countries in Latin America, if we can make it more reasonable and safer and better for families to stay where they are, that's what we need to do to promote better economies for our southern neighbors. Another is to expand opportunities for family reunification. One of the issues with the deportations is that families who are here are now being split up. And very often the primary breadwinners in these families of undocumented people or families in which the children are citizens but the parents are not. We need to look at how in our policies can we bring these families back together. We also could look at an expanded use of temporary worker visas. There are many families that would happily come here part of the year to work and then go back to Mexico, for example, and live the part of the year in Mexico, rather than just sneak across the border and work, for example, in the fields or in construction. If we had a better temporary worker program, that could help some of those families. We also need to look at broad-based legalization. As many of us have heard, there are roughly 10 million people still in this country who are undocumented and who've been here for years or even many decades. And trying to deport these people is not only unreasonable and impractical, but it's also grossly unfair, particularly to their children, again, who are now citizens by birth, naturalization here in this country. So we need to be attentive to that. And then restoration to due process. One of the crying needs right now in our country is to help provide greater access to legal assistance to immigrants and to address the backlog of immigration and deportation cases. Because right now there are a lot of people languishing in deportation or who've been allowed to live with a family member who are just in limbo because there's such a huge backlog of cases that the administrative law judges and the immigration appeals judges have not been able to hear. So we need to address that issue. As we know, in our province, there are a number of organizations that are very actively working to advocate for these types of changes and for the rights of immigrants, both documented and undocumented. In Milwaukee, many of us are familiar with Voz de la Frontera. Many of our friars and our postulants have worked with them over the years. Here in Chicago, the Office for Immigrant Affairs and Immigration Education is also very active. So those are ways in which we can address the very great need for advocacy. And finally, we can look at ways of providing direct services to migrants and their families by supporting programs that provide them with food, shelter, clothing, those vital legal and resettlement services, counseling. Many of them have gone through a lot of trauma, so they need counseling, job opportunities, and the other things that meet their basic needs. Here in Chicago, the Port Ministries is providing that for many of the people who have settled in the back of the yards neighborhood. Many of them are undocumented. Our friars are working on the bread truck and the Faith on Wheels programs, providing assistance to them. And I'm pleased to say that we have more friars helping in that this year than we did in last year. So that's really a really promising thing for us. In Detroit, Freedom House provides for emergency shelter and resettlement services for immigrants. And of course, I think the Detroit Windsor Refugee Coalition is still up and running. In the Fox Valley region of our province, the Catholic Charities of Green Bay provides resettlement and immigration services. And Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee is very well known for providing a host of legal services for immigrants and can also use more help. I don't think that there are a lot of Latin American immigrants who are being serviced by the House of Peace and the St. Ben's Community Meal, the Capuchin Community Services. But David, you can probably point this out better than I. There are certainly a number of Southeast Asian immigrants who've been assisted by the House of Peace over the years and continue to get those services. So that's basically where I'm finished with that portion of the presentations.
Thank you, John. So thank you everyone for listening. We've shared with you a little bit about what SOA is, School of Americas, why we went there, why we went to the border this year, what we did there, and then John shared with us what are some of his ideas of what we can do about it. So what I'm going to do now is to invite you, if you would like to share, if you have any stories you want to share, or if you want to share any questions at this point, this would be the time. You can either, if you have questions, go to the chat button and you can type something into the chat button, or you can also feel free to unmute yourself as well. And to unmute your audio, or to start your audio, there's a button in the corner that says mute and unmute, and you can unmute yourself. Are there any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, just want to share with you what this photo is here, and then we can do our closing prayer. And if in the future, if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out to any one of us individually, or you can email jpic@thecapuchins.org, jpic@thecapuchins.org, and we can answer any questions that we can answer, and if not, we can find somebody who can. This is a picture of a person who's immigrating and walking through Mexico, and you can see there's a Franciscan there that's a part of it, sharing that, Jesus was also a refugee, and that it says in the corner, the migrants, they are not criminals, they are international workers. And so just drawing our attention to who Jesus was and how he also had to walk and had to travel very far, both as a baby and other parts of his life as a refugee and also as an immigrant. Okay, if there are no questions, I'd like to move to the closing prayer. And David, I've muted you, so I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Nope, he's muted.
I was trying to find a particular prayer here. Let me see if I can find it really quick. It's got to be here. Let me look here really quick. I can't find it. That's okay. Okay. Lord, we want to thank you for this time together. We want to ask you to continue to stir in our hearts a desire to serve those who are most in need of your love and your attention, and give us the strength to make the hard to not make hard choices, but to do what is sometimes uncomfortable for us because it is the right thing to do, which is can be so hard to do. To remember that it is through giving of ourselves and through dying to ourselves that we actually find victory, not through trying for success all the time, but through faithfulness and through dying to ourselves and to rise into your life. We ask you to continue to bless our efforts. And we ask this through Jesus Christ, our brother.
Amen.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you also for trying out Zoom. And if you have any questions about either of those things, then feel free to reach out. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.